Hello, welcome to another edition of Inside the Birds Analytics Style. I'm Geoff Mosher. I'm with our analytics expert, Sam Finkel, and we are continuing our podcast series looking at NFL Draft, 2025 NFL Draft prospects, breaking down each position group and really looking at them from an analytics standpoint, as Sam does such a great job. And he has brought these scatter charts to this podcast in which they measure these prospects and their productivity and their athleticism and how they profile compared to each other, compared to first rounders of the last 4 years, compared to top 100 picks over the last 4 years, and then compared to overall players at their position, drafted players at their position over the last 4 years. It's been a fun exercise. It's given us, Sam, not only a look into this year's class in each position group, but also how it compares. And then you've taken the extra step to show where some Eagles at these positions have been drafted and how they compare. So that helps us kind of look at what the Eagles are looking at, athleticism versus production, because I think you could say they love athletic testing, and some of the charts you'll show will show that. They really like production early on in the draft, first, second round guys. You know, they're not afraid to sacrifice blowing it up for a guy who's been really productive. Landon Dickerson might be a good example, a second rounder. Not that he's not a very good athlete, but he's more of a productive college player, played every position, huge behemoth road grading guy. But I don't think, with all the injuries he had, you wouldn't say, and he didn't blow up the combine like, say, a Jordan Davis did, a defensive tackle.
Absolutely. And I think the opposite example of Jordan Davis or Nolan Smith are also really good points. So, but I think it's very position dependent, as we will get into.
Absolutely. And in this episode, because we've already done edges and we've already done interior defensive linemen, so go back and check those if you haven't. In this episode, we're going to do what I think is the trickiest position to evaluate, not only from an analytics standpoint, from a tape standpoint. Certainly for this exercise, right, when we talk about off-the-ball linebackers, production can mean different things for different coaches in this scheme. And then numbers and rates can be somewhat deceiving too. You could have a fantastic missed tackle rate. You may never miss a tackle, but if you're making that tackle 15 yards down the field, right, you're not exactly doing your job great either. It may mean you're not a great athlete. You don't run well. You're just really fundamentally sound. So as we always say, none of this is the be all to end all, but I do think inside linebacker and maybe even safety, when we get to that in an episode, it's just, those are positions that are really, really difficult. And I know that from an NFL standpoint, Sam, like, they really look for high athletic testing to the point where sometimes production isn't as always important as it is per se, maybe a defensive end or a quarterback.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, it's a very tough position because of those reasons.
What do you look for I mean, you're a guy who's coached, you're at Penn State. You were there as a assistant quarterbacks coach, but you're an offensive guy. You're going up against defense. What always stood out to you about the linebacker position?
Yeah. I mean, usually, eyes, athlete, demeanor, we're looking at those kind of things. Like, can he make a play? Can he get to space?
Mm-hmm.
Is he rangy? I know that's more of like a safety thing, but if we can get a linebacker that can move across the field pretty quickly, that's a problem, and we got to account for that. So,
Right.
Athleticism does factor in, but fundamentals also factor in. If you have a guy that's a little bit more fundamental, but not as good in space, you can take advantage of that.
When you were a coach at Penn State, I mean, the place is called Linebacker U for a reason. Which were the linebackers were there at that time?
Yeah, so Micah Parsons was there.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he was a little special for sure. Unfortunately, obviously a Cowboy now, but he was one of the best athletes I've ever seen. And a lot of guys were there, but basically he was the biggest problem, at least in practice. I'm glad he was on our squad and we weren't facing him every week.
Now, interestingly, Micah Parsons, who has been a great pass rusher ever since he got into the NFL with the Cowboys, was not used at Penn State the way the Cowboys have used him. He was an off-the-ball linebacker, which is the position we're going to get into today. Now, in the Manny Diaz defense, he blitzed quite a bit, but not around the edges. He was more of like your traditional Mike linebacker blitz, like A-gap blitz and stunting and things like that. I don't remember him really coming around the edges unless he was being a looper or anything like that.
Yeah, so he spent a lot of his time with Pry, before Manny,
Oh, that's right, Brent Pry. Yes,
and Coach Pry, you put him in a lot of different positions. But it's interesting because he's actually a data point that I used in this tool. And I was actually a little bit surprised about his athleticism score. He was either like an 82 or an 83,
Hmm.
but his production score was 99. So,
Right.
and that just goes to show you that maybe he relative to, linebackers and again, he was an off the ball linebacker in this measurement, and maybe it would be more fair to categorize him as an edge because that is how he's used now.
Sure.
But it's hindsight, and I think that's a good point that we can describe. The data points we used were the positions that they were categorized at during the draft. So thank you for that. It actually brings up an excellent point that I could make.
Absolutely. And one of the linebackers we'll take a look at as I now share the chart. And hopefully people can see this better. I tried to blow it up a little bit more than in our last one. One of the linebackers we're going to talk about is the antithesis sort of Micah Parsons. It's a guy who was in high school, was an edge rusher, and then was moved to inside linebacker, and that's Jihad Campbell out of Alabama because, when he was at Alabama early, Sam, they had, just these guys like Will Anderson, and there's another defensive end who went early whose name is escaping me now. So they're pretty much blessed with great edge talent every year. So they moved Jihad Campbell, who's a great athlete, to inside linebacker, off the ball linebacker, and he had a really nice career there.
Yeah, and you can see he is right near the middle of the intersection on this line, on the left side, showing that he did not have, that first round, production, but his athleticism is right on average for what you expect to see in the first round.
Right. Now we have a similar case here. The green line, for those who need to understand this, right? The green line is the average production of an NFL first round drafted inside linebacker over the last 4 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't say production. And then the other green line that crosses is the athleticism. So this almost makes it look, what European flag looks like this? Like Sweden or something, where it's like it almost looks like the flag is backward, right? Because the T is sort of toward the right side of the flag instead of the left side of the flag. But yeah,
I'm so glad you brought that up because now that's all I'm going to see for the rest of the video.
I could have the wrong country now. I'm going to have to Google and see if I have the correct country on that. Plus, I think it might be a blue line instead of green, but you get the point. The design of it looks the same. So this is an interesting case here, though, where almost all of the projected I guess these are projected top 50 linebackers that we have here on the chart.
So basically, I took every linebacker that had a combine score and I put them on this chart. So
that's about 1, 2. I'm not going to do the math here, but it looks to be like 15 at least.
Yeah, if not a little bit more, but it's probably close to that number.
Top 100 most likely. Usually about 15 linebackers are going to go in your first 3 or 4 rounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. So when you compare this to the average first round draft pick over the last 4 years, only 1 to 5 guys are above the athletic score, and there's no one is above the production average at around 83.
Yeah, and I think that is, indicative of this linebacker class in general and what we've seen in the past, right? You're not seeing guys that you would see fall into this high floor safe zone or this high ceiling, high floor blue chip zone. So like nobody is necessarily worth it if that's what you're looking for as an organization.
Right.
However, if you want to develop a guy, there's like you said, 6 guys in that hidden gem category.
Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, with the guys who are close here, like the Teddy Buchanan, right? About 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys who are pretty good athletic testers. And even when you get a little bit below the baseline athleticism, which is 83 here, I'm thinking 82.5.
Yeah, something very close to that.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Danny Stutzman, not too far away, Carson Schwessinger, who will probably be a top 50, 60 pick out of UCLA, not too far away from that as well. But the ones that really jump out here, Jalen Walker, he's an interesting one because he tests athletically above average, Sam, at around 83, 84. And once again, the Georgia guys, they're always a little bit scant on the production side because everybody's so good in that defensive front. And he's another guy where NFL people aren't exactly sure where he's going to fit. He's almost too small for the edge, but a little too big and sort of hair on fire for the structure of inside linebacker.
Yeah, 100%. And that makes it a little bit difficult to evaluate and figure out where he fits. And it's a team that really believes in him and one or the other might draft him differently, right? I mean, positional value is important in drafts, and especially when there is less positional value attributed to linebackers, you may not see teams jump at that necessarily
Right.
if that's where they view him at. And of course, we'd be remiss to not mention Georgia players in these kind of videos.
Of course. And I like how you've added in red here where Eagles linebackers have fallen because not surprisingly, given how they played last year, I mean, Nakobe Dean torches everybody in terms of production. I mean, he'd be the most productive linebacker out of this group when you measure his production in college compared to this group's production. And Zach Bond, not too far away.
Yeah, I actually think it's really interesting having Zach Bond here and see where he falls, because this chart would say that he is a like above average player, and obviously at the beginning of his career, that's not really what happened. So it's kind of I think this gives some validity to this methodology a little bit, which is cool.
Right. It also shows something that I've spoken about with Adam and Greg is that why this position is so difficult to really truly evaluate is that Dean and Bond fall under the average athleticism of a first round over the last 4 years. But because neither of them were just blow it up at the combine type athletes. I mean,
Right.
I don't think Nicole even ran his 40 because of an injury at his pro day, but neither were just, they're not the Edger and Coopers of the world. And I don't know if I'm sure he factored into this last four. Was he a first round pick? I think he was a second round pick, actually, right?
So the
Last year.
purple line, he'll fill in the purple line.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy who just blew it up at the combine. He was great. So, but again, neither of Vaughn or Dean did that. But look at the production that they've
Right.
got, right? I mean, they're you would put them in the blue chip category now because of how they played, even though they don't fall into the blue chip category on this list, on this
Right.
chart. What else jumps out to you from this chart?
From this one in particular, I think what really jumps out is, I mean, like I said, Jihad Campbell is probably the top linebacker in this class, and you can see that because I mean he falls closest to this production line, and his athleticism is right on par with what you see. But I also think we have to talk about guys like Mondin and Asante, who are the best athletes, at least testing wise, in this class, and yet their production is still not there. So I think those guys are definitely worth looking at, especially if you can get good value for them. But those
Mhm.
guys are guys you can try to unlock. And we're going to talk a little bit about this more probably in the safety position too. But there is some positional, preference. And I think linebacker is a position, and I know I talked about it a little bit, where fundamentals and production may be more important than athleticism, depending on your scheme and depending on your team philosophies. And I think safety is probably a better example of that. And we can get into why in that video. But linebacker, you're not necessarily your best athletes are going to be your edges or your corners typically, if you have the similar body types, because that's where you need the athleticism. Fundamentals are more important on the inside because you're going to need to be a guy that can produce, and so
Yeah.
I think you'll see that a little bit in this, and especially in safety.
Now, I think this chart speaks well for Schlesinger as well. You see how close he profiles to Zach Bond right here. I mean, he's a highly productive player. He was a walk-on, wound up by his last year starting, and he's not that far below the standard or the average for athletic testing where you'd be really, really concerned. He obviously was able to be productive in college despite not having like through the roof athletic testing.
Right, and that's the thing. He'll definitely shine a little bit more on the next chart too,
Mhm.
which we can definitely appreciate. But he's definitely one of my favorite linebackers in this class for a lot of the reasons that you just said. And I think that he would be very successful because he is a high. When we look at the purple chart, you'll see he falls in that high floor category, and I think that's really important for the linebacker position.
All right, let's go over that purple chart. Oh, by the way, Jeremiah Trotter here, you could see, and this is a great chart, really. I mean, because we knew this about Jeremiah Trotter coming out of Clemson. He was a more productive player than he was a great athlete. Not the biggest guy in the world, not the fastest guy in the world, not going to jump through a roof. He's not going to remind you of Edgerrin Cooper, or I'm trying to think of other really fast athletic linebackers, or the old Ernie Sims, right? But a productive player at Clemson, and that's why he was a 5th-round pick who will probably beat the odds of most 5th-round picks and wind up playing quite a bit in his NFL career.
Yeah, and it's important to understand the context that this is him compared to 1st-round talent.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see where he shifts, or I guess where the line shifts and where he stays relative to his position.
Correct. All right, so now we'll move on to comparing this year's edge group against, this is the top, say again, top 100?
Top 100, yep.
Top 100 over the last 4 years. And now, as you see the lens get a little wider, speaks pretty well for guys like Campbell and Carson Schwessinger.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess what this is saying is if you're going to take Jihad Campbell past the 1st round, I mean, there is absolute value that he is above average in production and athleticism and could be a home run hit there.
Right.
To the same effect, I mean, you still have a bunch of hidden gems in that top left quadrant. But Schwessinger is that guy that really provides a nice floor for production.
Yeah. And, most people who are familiar with the NFL draft, especially Eagles fans, Sam, know that inside linebacker for most teams, there's really only, to me, 2 or 3 or 4 teams that will value inside linebacker enough to be a 1st-round pick. That's the Ravens, the Steelers, the Cowboys will occasionally still do it. And there's a 4th team. I can't remember. It's not maybe the Bucks, because of the way that Todd Bowles likes to use his linebackers as blitzers. He likes athleticism. He likes smart guys. He plays a complex defense. But most teams, Sam, don't take inside linebackers in the 1st round. Oh, I think the Lions did it too, right? Didn't they take 2 years ago?
They took Jack Campbell.
Right. So, but still, like 2/3 of the league at least will almost automatically rule out a linebacker in the 1st round, which is why I think this purple chart is a little bit better to use, because now this is encompassing top 100, and then you can see as the average shifts a little bit and the numbers, come back to earth a little, you have a lot of guys in this gems area.
Yeah. And I think that shows what this class is. They're not the best producers necessarily, but there's a lot of athletes in this class. And it just takes, teams that think athletes are important for them to, fall in this category of top 100 picks.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schulter makes sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
As we go to the next one, we'll see where the Eagles linebackers fell. And, not surprisingly, once again, when you add more non-1st-round picks to the equation, Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean look better. And as you brought up, when you widen the lens, look at Jeremiah Trotter, where he falls now.
Yeah, and again, this is comparing to the top 100 picks, and Trotter was not in that top 100. He was past that. So, I mean, there's value if you really value production. And it's actually interesting because all the Eagles on this chart are above average producers in this context.
Yep.
So I think that's obviously something that they value.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas in a lot of positions, athletic ability and athleticism is big for them. We know that inside linebacker, they're really, in general, looking for guys who understand the position, can play the position. They're not always shooting and throwing darts at guys who blow it up at the combine at this position. And their draft history kind of shows that. And even their free agency history shows that. I'm trying to think who the most, athletic linebacker the Eagles have drafted or brought in over. I mean, Devin White would be the prime example, but he didn't make the team. I'm really trying to think to myself, who's a guy that blew it up at the linebacker? I'll tell you who it is. It's Ben Van Sumeren. But he didn't even get drafted, right? But he is a ridiculously good athlete.
The one that came to my mind was Jordan Hicks. And I just looked it up. His athletic score in this context was 84. But that's the only one that really came to my mind. I'm going to look up Ben Van Sumeren's.
Now,
too.
the question I do you remember what year Jordan Hicks was drafted in?
Yeah,
he might have been drafted the 1 year that Howie Roseman was not in charge of things. And
I think you're right. I think that's exactly the year that happened, because it's 2015.
Yeah. So very interesting there. All right, so that's our trend. If you're Jay Higgins, I forget what school Jay Higgins went to at the moment. I can check it, but
he went to Iowa.
Iowa, that's right. Iowa linebackers are generally productive players and smart players, and they can key and diagnose, but they are not going to test well athletically and normally, and that continues to be the case here. As you can see, his production far beats his athletic testing there.
But if you expand the threshold one more time, he'll fill it right there.
Oh, look at that. Because he is more productive, like many Iowa linebackers, right? Then now the red line is, again, any linebacker drafted, right? That there's information on. Okay.
Yep. In the past 4 years, the average of those.
Right. So like a typical Iowa linebacker, Jay Higgins is going to overachieve when you compare him to the entire drafted class, and he's going to be on the higher end of the production side. And this speaks well for Chris Paul and Demetrius Knight. Chris Paul out of, I believe, Mississippi, correct?
So Chris Paul is out of
and Barrett Carter, I think, is a Clemson kid.
You were right about that.
Played with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Yeah. Yeah. So when you compare these guys aren't going to be first round picks. So you can almost dismiss the first chart because it doesn't matter. Why would you compare guys who aren't going to be in the first rounders, right? If you're an NFL team, you're looking at it, you're saying, hey, if I get myself a Chris Paul Jr. in round 3 or a Barrett Carter in round 3 or 4, look at this compared to drafted linebackers. We're all right here.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that's how it probably would be done. Just for the sake of consistency, we did that. But linebacker is a position that, like you said, is not really heavily emphasized in the first round.
Right.
Again, with safety, too, when we get to that one, is probably very similar.
If I were to guess, there might be 2. Well, it sort of depends on where a team views Jalen Walker's ultimate destination. He's a little bit of a wild card. But so he could be a first round pick, because I know, for example, he's like top 5 overall prospect for Jeremiah, or top 10 for Daniel Jeremiah, because he's just hair off. He can do so many things. But again, until you know where you're putting him and what position he's at, he's a little bit of a wild card.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, look, there is justification to take him in the first round based on the first chart. Yeah.
Right. But I don't know that anybody other than Walker and Jihad Campbell will go in the first round. There might be maybe a Smail Mondon will sneak in there. We'll see. Eugene Asante, is he Oregon? I forget where he's from.
Eugene Asante is from Auburn.
Auburn, that's right. Obviously, no matter what you compare him to, he's an excellent athlete.
Yeah. I mean, look, he looks like he's the top athlete in this class. So it's hard to be better than that.
Right.
But I think, interestingly, if you go down to the next, the interlay between the Eagles, I think it also just shows you, I love seeing Schlesinger right next to Zach Bond.
Yeah.
And I think that's super interesting. And, they both fall in this high floor, high ceiling group as opposed, like, compared to the entire draftable linebackers. And I think that's really interesting. And I think he's a name you should keep an eye on.
Yeah. This is how a lot of personnel people do their prospect reflections, right? I mean, they measure, they do the measurables. Like, are you similar sized? Are you similar speed? Are you similar productive? This is how prospect reflections come in. And right now you're looking at Schlesinger and Bond and saying, hey, I see a lot of similarities there.
Yeah. And I mean, Vaughn's already in the building on a big deal now.
Mhm.
Is it possible that the Eagles take a swing at a guy that profiles similarly? Who knows?
And by the way, right now, the Eagles, if they had to play a game today, Sam, and line up an inside linebacker, right, with Nakobe Dean still coming back from an injury, with no Oren Burks, with Ben Van Sumeren, A, coming back from an injury, and B, being listed as a fullback, the Eagles' top 3 linebackers healthy right now are Zach Bond, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., and then when you get into number 3, you're getting like Dallas Gant. So this would be a good draft with all those, fifth round picks if you want to maneuver to try to help deepen your linebacker crew.
Yeah. And honestly, from like a strategic perspective, if I, again, were in charge of the Eagles, would be really cool. Obviously not what's happening. I think you take a swing at a guy in the top left quadrant. Just because there's so many guys there. And I think you don't need, you might need a guy to plug and play early, but there's not an expectation to start right away, like continue and like maintain starting. So I think you can take a guy that you want to develop. And
Absolutely.
I think that's a perfect opportunity to do so.
Yeah. And look, a guy like Danny Stutzman, I believe from Oklahoma State, creeps in to the upper right quadrant. So he looks like a guy, if he's there in round 3, round 4, then you're getting a player that you can expect that will measure up well against other drafted linebackers and give you some production. And he's actually over now the threshold for the average threshold for athleticism. So that's good for him. Same thing with Smail Mondon and Cody Simon, Nicholas Martin. So there's some good options here.
So the thing on Danny Stutzman, I have him in the chart underneath, and I have him listed as good late. He's great value if you can get him late. He led this linebacker group in total tackles over his career, but he also led in missed tackles. But that's just a volume thing. He had the highest snap count. He had the most snaps out of all these linebackers. So I think that's an important understanding, that obviously with the most snaps, you're going to have the highest volume in tackles and the highest volume in missed tackles, which is evident in his rates. He doesn't have the highest tackle rate, and he doesn't have the highest missed tackle rate.
Good stuff. That's really good information to know. I kind of like you kind of getting me sold on Danny Stutzman now as a guy who's, round 3, round 4, maybe. I have no idea. I'm the worst at trying to predict where inside linebackers go. I can tell you not many go in the first round. I'm sure you know that. I can tell you the second round inside linebackers tend to be the guys who fall in the upper left, like they really test well athletically, right? That's where you're getting your, because it's such a run and chase and occasionally blitz position. And, you have to cover, you got to tackle, you have to be a pretty good athlete and to get into the second round. So once you start widening the lens where athleticism, like elite athleticism, isn't that important and production is, and you get into third and fourth round, that's why you can get some really good players here.
Absolutely.
All right. Good stuff. Let's take an overall look at the class. You divided them up into your gems, and you have the hierarchy here. So, boy, Jalen Walker, I called him a wild card. I think your chart here really explains why.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he had the lowest total tackles, the best missed tackles, and then the worst total tackle rate. But if you look, it's also a volume thing, because he had the second lowest snap count.
Right.
Just because there were so many guys you could put there. So really, I mean, he really is relying on that athletic testing. He just didn't have very many opportunities to even produce. And we've already said, Georgia, there's too many guys to really have that production. But he even got fewer opportunities than even Mondon.
Right. I mean, well, look at Mondon, by the way. He's almost the anti-Georgia defensive player. He played 1,643 total snaps.
Yeah.
So these are actually some pretty good numbers when you log that kind of volume.
Absolutely. And again, big shout out to Carson Schwessinger with the highest total tackle rate at 13.52.
Absolutely.
And Jack Kaiser with the best missed tackle rate. Unfortunately, I believe his athleticism was lacking, and his total production was lacking.
Sure.
And so he falls into this avoid category.
Right.
But, I mean, he's a fundamental guy. So if that's value, I mean, he didn't produce necessarily on par with the average drafted linebacker, but if you care about fundamentals, I mean, it makes sense to have bring someone in like Kaiser.
Absolutely. And to your point on Danny Stutzman, look at all of that's got to be the most among all these linebackers. Yep. 2,423, 2,423 total snaps. So naturally, he's got a highest total tackle and the most missed tackles, of course, because you're just going to have that when you have that many snaps. But his rates are good. And this guy's going to be a good player. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but he tracks well to be a good player in the league.
Yeah. And I have this little note on Jay Higgins now that we brought him up. The UA means unathletic.
I was going to ask you why I had said UA next to it.
Yeah, because he fits right in that last threshold where he gets like considered in this safe area, but he's just so unathletic.
Yeah,
that I feel like I needed to mention it. His athletic rate is at 55. So and that's
Iowa. All right, Cooper DeJean is the anomaly for Iowa, right? Iowa puts a couple of good. They obviously put good defensive players and tight ends in the league and athletic tight ends, but for the most part, I don't think Iowa is known for like having guys that just wreck it at the combine very often.
Yeah, that's also very fair.
Yeah, that's a corn-fed group. It's like the Wisconsin group of linebackers and offensive linemen. Same thing. They're always listen. I bet you Jay Higgins can play several years in the NFL, maybe as a backup or maybe as a third linebacker in a base because he's going to be nowhere to be. He's going to know where to drop in a zone because Iowa plays more zone than anybody in the world, and they have good coaching. He'll figure out a way to like stay around the league and be that guy who you can rely on in like certain down and distance situations.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And those Iowa guys, they stay around.
Yeah. How about our buddy Kobe King here? What do we make of him? Because he showed at Penn State this last year. He's a very good first and second down linebacker. You really don't want him in coverage. That was pretty much evident during Penn State's postseason run. But there's value. Greg and I and Adam talked about this for guys who are good first and second down linebackers in the NFL.
Yeah, it really, hurt my heart to have to put him in this avoid category. But hey, listen, everyone has a little bit of biases, but data, it can't lie, and I can't stretch it to make him, more appealing or attractive.
And that missed tackle rate is not pleasant.
Yeah, it's one of the higher ones. It might be like the second or third highest one on there.
Yeah.
So, and I think we saw that.
The second, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what? Again, do I think he'll get drafted day 3? He has an opportunity to. He played in a very good defense, and he is a good downhill linebacker. That's just really sort of a dying breed in the NFL.
Yeah,
just a downhill linebacker. All right, great stuff. That is linebackers. We're gonna finish this out soon with corners and safeties, but a really good look at the linebacker picture there from an analytics standpoint. Thanks for watching. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. You have been watching Inside the Birds Analytics.